Okay guys, I think the time has come to do the video about this engine renovation, restoration, whatever you want to call it. It's about 95-96% complete. At least the top end of it is. I still got to do the underneath of it, but that'll come later. And I figured you guys are pretty curious to know what I've been up to these past few weeks with this, so I'll go through all this with you and show you what I can. And I'll just give you a warning, those of you who have ADHD or whatever and you can't sit still, this may take a while. This video may run a while, so it's not going to be a short video, so you've been warned. Anyways, you remember, if you check back in the first video or so that I made on this truck, it had some aftermarket stuff on the engine, and had different intake, different carburetor, had a Holly carburetor, and had some other issues going on with it. Didn't run very well, and so fool around with it, and I tried to get it running a little bit better, and I rebuilt the carburetor of questionable quality to begin with. I don't think it was anything I did, but the carburetor was just in bad shape, so still really didn't run too good. And I just kind of thought about it, and I thought, well, you know, I'm going to go through and just put this engine back like it originally was, as close as possible within reason. Which reason means not spending a lot of money and not pulling it out, and just using mainly things I could find from the junkyard and the parts store when it came down to it. I tried to stay out of buying anything new, but I had to in a couple cases, which I'll show you. But so that's what I did. I pulled the aftermarket intake, carburetor, and valve covers off and sold all that. And then got going with making trips to the junkyard and finding the parts I needed. And these are kind of a red-headed stepchild in one respect, because there's just not a lot of interest and not a lot of support right now about putting one of these late 70s Chevy engines back like it used to be. People, you know, I remember coming up when these things were fairly new, you know, people were all about pulling the vacuum lines off of it, and they still are. Vacuum lines and anything that was considered smog claptrap, pulling that off of it. And so that it made it a little bit more difficult. But once I started going to a good junkyard, it was easier for me to find a lot of good parts. And I just did some research on the internet, and found, you know, some pictures, original pictures, and then they kind of showed me how things were supposed to look and how things were routed and clips and paint and things like that. So that helped. And also, just as I cleaned parts up, I was able to do a little bit of detective work and find some original paint on the item, so it told me what color and what shade stuff in here ought to be painted. So it really helped. This was a fun project. It was I just kind of wanted to see what my abilities were, you know. And like I said, this is not a museum quality restoration, but it's not. I wouldn't even call it a restoration. I just call it a rehab or a renovation, whatever, because it's not perfect, and it's not going to be. Sure, not a perfect truck. You can see that, but it's fun to do, and it didn't cost me a whole lot of money. There's a couple items I had to buy that cost some money, but it was fun researching and finding all this. And so I'm going to get on with this and start showing you what I had to do. And I'll tell you one last little thing here. This is a C10 pickup. This is a half-ton pickup. So this engine is it's a 350, 4-barrel 350, and these trucks came with those. Some of them came rarely with a 400 small block, and then a fairly significant amount of them came with a 305 2-barrel. So any of those three V8s are all going to look the same. They're all equipped the same. The carburetor may be a little bit different, but They're all the same, and they're all very close to what's called an LM1 350. That was just the sales code. It's called an LM1 350, which is a 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80 350. Just a very common engine. But as far as a half-ton goes, it looks a lot like what you would find in an Impala or a Caprice or a Camaro, van, things of that nature. So if you're restoring one of those, putting one of those back kind of original, that'll also help you with this, looking at this, I think. There's the mail lady. No mail for me today. That's the second time she's went by here. I wonder if she goes back to the post office and reloads. So anyway, yeah guys, and when you get into like a C20 and a C30, that's when some stuff starts changing. They don't have as many emissions requirements, so they may or may not have a cat converter, they may not have a EGR, they may not have a smog pump. This one did not have a smog pump. May have a different carburetor, may have a different air cleaner, etc., etc. So here we go. Let's take a look at this thing. You notice from the last time you saw it, in the last video you saw this, that it's quite a bit more cluttered up in here, and that's kind of how it works out. You know, you have to put your vacuum lines and brackets and hoses and etc., all that back on here. So this is what it looks like. This was, yes, that was my head just hitting the hood latch. That hurt. But this is as close as I can get it within reason, and of course it's the right color. It's GM blue, not Chevrolet blue. I don't know where that ever came from. They didn't have a Chevrolet blue. It's GM corporate blue. The whole entire block and valve covers are painted that color, intake, everything. And let's talk about the metal parts of it first. Things that are attaching to it. This bracket here is supposed to be kind of a semi-gloss black, which it is. And that bracket, the bracketry for all that, power steering pump, fan. It's all pulleys down there are supposed to all be black, that same shade of black. That bracket back here is a little bit different color. I'm not exactly sure the original color of that, but that's a close approximation. Let's see, what else? Now all these vacuum lines, this was an interesting thing to do because all these were missing. It was missing the vacuum lines on the engine, it was missing the charcoal canister, and I was lucky enough to find all this original stuff. These are just about entirely original vacuum lines on here. You see some of them have a color code on them like that. That's original. And one of them over here's got a little, if you can see it, it's got little remnants of a paint stripe on that. So that was pink right there. But one way you can always tell original vacuum lines on one of these GMs is because that they are ridged. You see those right there? You see how they've got the ridges running up there? So those are original. And some of this over here is the same way on the charcoal canister. Like that one here, I added in new. I didn't have one for it, so I had to put a new piece right here in the center. That little piece there. It goes down here to that goes to the fuel tank. That's the vent for the fuel tank, and you'll notice that has a yellow clamp on it. You may be wondering, well, why did you decide to paint that clamp yellow? Because I looked at 2 or 3 of these trucks and they all had a yellow clamp right there. That type of clamp, yellow. So all this is original, as original as it can get off of a 350 or a 305. You can see that where if it didn't have a clamp originally, I did not put one back on it, like right there. Any of those, none of those had clamps on them. That's your thermal vacuum switch. That's one of them there. That's another one right there. That one was painted engine color originally. Over here, this is kind of neat. What I did with this, I got some special tape that's not electrical tape, and I kind of duplicated this harness wrap right here, and kind of did some here. also kind of neaten it up. And this look right here, this is a little deal. Ow, kind of hot there. Sun burned me bad. No, I didn't. But what that is right there, originally that had a little plastic restraining strap that would have snapped in right there, and it would come down and come around and come back over here and snap back in there and held those lines up. But that thing is missing. It was broken, and I couldn't find one, so I just repurposed the end off a bungee cord and used that as a hose holder, and I guarantee you 90% of the people that see it won't ever know the difference. So, and I cleaned the wiring up as well as possible. I had to repair some harnesses. That one up there, that coming off the center up there, those two green wires, they come down, and they come down to here over the valve cover, and one splits, and that's the feed for the air conditioning compressor, and the other one goes over to that's the kick up for the idle when the air conditioner's running. That is a 1979 carburetor. It's exactly the carburetor that should be on this, so that worked out well. Pay some close attention to the spark plug wiring here, because these are not the right plug wires to begin with. They are for this engine, but the issue is back here. You see we have this hole down back there, and you notice how it's got those holes in it, but there's nothing, those ends don't come up through those holes. They're supposed to. The right style it snaps into that retainer. So you could pull that retainer off and pull the plug wires all out with it. But I'm just going to use these plug wires because they're in pretty good shape. I had to repair one of them, but they're in okay shape. But originally the plug wires would have been gray, light gray, with dark color ends on them. But you can see I've routed the plug wires as close as possible to the way they were routed factory. You have that large clamp back there at the back of the throttle cable. Well, that's for the kick down, but it's where that thing there goes through. And then they come around, they've got a 4-place holder there. 2 of them drop off and go through a holder on the stand out on the valve cover. Go those 2 rear cylinders. 2 of them clamp into a retainer right there that also holds that wiring harness, and they come across the valve cover, and you can't really see where they go, but there's peek down in there, there's another one of those wire retainers. And look back at this, there's a lot going on right here, and I found this originally. I'm looking at pictures, and I know this is correct. So that is the temperature sender wire, and you see how it is, that retainer there is made so you could snap that wire into the center, and then it comes down. And it's hard to see, but well, let's get over the other way. Make you dizzy there. Might not be able to see it, but it is. Alright, I'm kind of lost here. You can't see it, but it is retained in the center of those 2 plug wires right there. It runs down into the center because the sending unit for the temperature there's the end of it right there, and that wire runs up. That's where it's retained at. That's absolutely factory correct. So, and over here I'm using this alternator harness the way it was, but I've got to repair a section to repair this. This has already been taped up right there, so I'm going to repair that later on. But it also has another one of those multi-purpose clips right there. Holds 2 plug wires and also holds the wiring harness to the valve cover. So it's got 2 more plug wires run down back there. There's those 2 standoffs. There's the 2 standoffs there. And I had to paint those standoffs to get them all the same color. Originally they're supposed to be kind of that natural plastic color right there, but over time I could only find 2 that were still kind of yellowish, and find 2 gray ones. They were originally clearish like that. They were not gray and they were not black. So I just took some paint I had and kind of painted them a close color there. So look over here at the carburetor. You'll notice that this is our choke system, and back here, that piece of connecting tubing, that's just a simple piece of this vacuum line like up here that's been cut off. That's original. That's what they use. They just snipped off a piece to do that with. And then on this other end that goes to the carburetor, it uses this special piece of, I guess this has probably got more silicone in it to resist heat, but just kind of a brick red piece of rubber tubing here on the choke housing. Of course, we've got original fuel line back together, not bent. And then we got that's our heat riser. And then up here, this is a remanufactured cheapo alternator, but I didn't have one of these 10 SI alternators, and I like the way this one looked. So for $30, I just went ahead and picked this one up. So it's pretty close to the way they looked original, and you'll see that it's got an original GM negative battery cable comes across. It's got a shield made into it. You never see that anymore. It's just a little heat shield or whatever you want to call it, I guess, to keep it off the alternator. And this line coming across here, this air conditioning line, that's totally incorrect. I just have that wire tied up there temporarily that goes over to the air conditioning evaporator over there. But what happened was, this line is supposed to come across where the fan shroud would be, and that's another story. I'll tell you about the fan shroud in a minute. But this line is supposed to come across here, but what happened is, I guess they put new lines on and they cut this one too short, so it will not, you can't lay it across here, it won't reach, it has to turn like that. So I have to put another line on it and deal with that. But we can go ahead and stop this, and we're going to start again on the second part of this. So see you there.